Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are very happy to have you with us today in this webinar among the AI webinar series. For today's talk and presentation, we have two amazing speakers that will be presenting theoretically upper bounded the expected adversarial robustness of GNNs. We have with us Yassine Abbahaddou, a PhD student at École Polytechnique. He is a uh, second year PhD student at Polytechnique based in Paris. He is working at the Laboratoire d'informatique de l'École Polytechnique under the supervision of Michalis Bazirgianis. He graduated from Central Paris and l'École Normale Supérieure de Paris-Calais. His research spans about the broad area of graph neural networks with a focus on adversarial robustness and geometric deep learning. And we have also with us in this talk Sofiane Ennadir, a PhD student at KTH. He is a PhD student in the EECS school at the KTH Royal Institute of Technology in Sweden, working under the supervision of Prof. Michalis Bazirgianis and Prof. Henrik Bostrom. Prior to joining to KTH, he completed a Master of Science degree in Applied Mathematics, Data Science from l'École Polytechnique in Paris, France. He also holds a Master of Engineering from Lyon's School of Industrial Management at the Mohammed VI Polytechnic University in Morocco. So without further ado, please, Yassine Abbahaddou and Ennadir, the floor is yours.
Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see.
So thank you, Iman, for the introduction, and thanks to the whole MoroccoAI team for the invitation. And thanks to everyone for showing up. So today we'll be presenting this work, theoretically upper bounding the expected adversarial robustness of graph neural network. It's pretty recent. It will appear in ICLR the coming months. This is a joint collaboration between École Polytechnique and Sofiane and Ennadir from KTH. So the title is a bit of a mouthful, but it's basically about adversarial robustness for graph neural network. I just want to briefly begin by presenting our collaborator and supervisor that helped us in this project. We are thankful for their help, especially Johannes with his insightful comments and suggestions. So let's start. So I included this slide just to help you position our work. So for me, when there is a deep learning paper, it's usually one of these four types of works. So there are research works that release benchmarks, which are the foundation upon which progress in deep learning is measured. So we can give the example of MNIST and Cypher datasets. And then there are papers that delve more into the architectures, optimization technique, or training setups. You can give the example of VAE or transformer architectures with attention is all you need paper. And then there is some works that focus more on the theory, which often operate as a black box, like analyzing representational properties of a neural network, or studying generalization behavior. Like in this equation, it was released in an ICML 4 years ago, where they have a closed formula of MLP that give how much training samples affect test sample. And finally, there is a fourth type of research paper which focus on the understanding of neural network. One popular aspect is explainability, where we want to interpret the model prediction. And another aspect of understanding deep learning models involves also studying the robustness of models to adversarial attack. So how much a small perturbation to input data can cause the model to make incorrect prediction. So our work will be mainly a mix of both understanding and theory. So as you may notice, our work directly applied to graph. So I'll give a short introduction on graphs and on what is graph representation learning. So the overall aim in graph representation learning is to learn informative representation on graphs. And when we talk about graph, we talk specifically on graph structured data, where we have a combination of a graph, so which is represented here by 8 gray nodes and edge sets. So edge nodes are linked by a pairwise relation which is we call the edge set. And in addition to that, we have some node features. So for each node, we have some properties or features that describe this node. So this is the definition that can be extended to data on edges as well, or other type of graphs like hypergraphs, but this is the standard definition. So graph structured data arise in many contexts. For example, we can have a graph of what is called web blocks. So two web blocks are connected if they contain some hyperlinks between each other. So molecules are graphs where atoms are linked by chemical bonds. And also there is a graph released by Deezer where they have a graph of artists and there is an edge between them if they are co-listed by the same user. So usually in the area of machine learning, we say that graphs are ubiquitous as they appear everywhere. And what can we learn from graph and what can we do with the graph structured data? So among these are the tasks of node and graph classification. For the first example, we may be able to classify, for example, web blocks into Democratic or Republican supporters. And then there's the node and graph regression. So we might want to predict or regress antibiotic molecules. And then there's the link prediction where for example, this example of these are artists, we may want to see for recommendation system, we want to see if there is a co-listening between two different artists. So long story short, the overall message in this slide is that in graph representation learning, we use the vectorial representation of node, and then we use that to perform one of these tasks. And we usually do that using graph neural network. So they are simply neural network that's performed on graph structured data that I presented in the previous slide. And in particular, I will be presenting a specific type of graph neural network called message passing neural network. Where at each message passing scheme layer, there is two steps. So the first one is the message pass step. So what we do is that for each node, we aggregate information from its local neighborhood. So imagine we have this graph with this node x2, and we will just aggregate the information from its local neighborhood, node 1, node 4, and node 7. So this could be simply done by some matrix multiplication. We take the normalized adjacency matrix and then we multiply it by the feature vector. So this is model is called the Graph Convolutional Network. And then the second step is the update step. So we took the message from the neighbors and then we took the previous hidden representation of the same node and then we just aggregated. So here we can just do this by simple sum and we add some learnable weights parameters and nonlinearity. So like this, we can create our message pass neural network. So each one of us can choose the function M and U that he wants, and we can define his own message passing neural network. So the idea is that we iteratively do this process of message pass updates until we take the last final node representation and perform one of the tasks that I presented in the previous slide. So this is the formula for GCN, Graph Convolutional Network with 3 layers. So in the past years, graph neural network has attracted both academic and industrial interests. And here are a few academic topics. So first, a big stream of research was into the expressivity of GNNs, where we wonder what kind of information of a graph neural network captures. So also several people study bottlenecks because many graph neural network have the problem of oversmoothing. As we use deep neural network, they perform very bad because of this bottleneck problem. And then there is this robustness to adversarial attacks that we'll be tackling today, which is also much studied and important. So when we wonder if we perturb our graph slightly by injecting or inserting some nodes, for example, if we play with the node feature or the structure, how much does this affect the prediction of the graph neural network? And in the industry, GNN were deployed, for example, 4 years ago by collaboration between Google Maps and DeepMind to improve the estimated time of arrival prediction. Twitter also uses GNN to detect fake news. There's also Amazon that released a work where they describe how to recommend products using GNN. And also the most inspiring one is the discovery of a new antibiotics using graph neural network. So I'm coming again to this blog post example by DeepMind where they explain how Google Maps gets use of GNNs to predict the arrival time. So basically they use real-time data. So it's the travel data. They do some segmentation of the road to have a graph representation of the map. And finally, they train a GNN on it, on this task of time prediction to accurately predict future traffic. So Google Maps is a really concrete example on how GNNs are used in the daily life of millions of people each day. But it turned out that in 2020, a German guy used hacked the system of GNNs. So he walked through a bridge in Berlin with 99 phone, and Google Maps showed that there were a very massive traffic jam in this bridge, even though there were 0 cars on the road. So that hack show how it's easy to change the traffic flow and indirectly make millions of people in the area to take a different path. So the overall message from this example is that when using graph neural network, a small noise in the data can significantly change the inference prediction. So that's why many researchers have studied or want to study how robust are GNNs to adversarial attack, and more importantly, how to make graph neural network more robust. So we will get more into the detail of our work and more into theoretical definition. So I'll begin by defining what is a graph adversarial attack. So traditionally, when we talk about adversarial attack, there is one famous example that illustrates this phenomenon with this panda image. So imagine you have a panda image, and you have a well-trained neural network like CNN, which really identify and predict this image as a panda with a high confidence, like 57%. But if we add some noise to this image, we still have an image which is very similar to the original one. We just add some random noise, but the model, these perturbations which are imperceptible to the human eye, can fool the neural network and lead the CNN to misclassify it as something entirely different, like a gibbon, for example, and even with a high confidence. So long story short, we have 2 different images which are very close to each other, but the CNN can give 2 different predictions with a very high confidence. So computer vision models are very well known to suffer from this adversarial vulnerability to adversarial attack. And the same thing can happen to a graph neural network, as they're also very sensitive to adversarial attack. So given 2 similar graphs, their prediction with a graph neural network might be 2 different in the output manifold. So when we talk about similarity between 2 graphs, we need to define a distance. As I said, in graph structured data, we have both the structure and the feature. So we need to define a distance that handles both. So we can have a linear combination of distance on graphs and the distance on the feature space. And we define the set of adversarial graph. So imagine we have a graph Jx, and we look at all the surrounding graphs within a neighborhood of radius epsilon. And then we check if those graphs have the same prediction with the GNN as the first inference prediction. If it's not the case, then this example, G tilde X tilde, is considered as an adversarial graph. So basically, if a GNN is very robust, we should have an empty set of adversarial graphs. So now I will give one of the main contributions of our work in the ICLR paper is the introduction of the concept of adversarial risk. So adversarial risk is the opposite of adversarial robustness, which is defined in equation 1. The equation is a bit complex, but I can give some insights about it. So imagine you have a graph Jx. You want to compute the probability that's the set, that's the ball surrounding this graph in the input manifold here. What is the portion of graphs in this ball that are adversarial attacks? So imagine you have a graph Jx, and we take a randomly surrounding neighbor graph input J tilde X tilde, and we will look at its prediction, and we will compare the distance between the 2 predictions. So if the prediction is pretty high, then we will consider this graph as an adversarial attack if the prediction changes too much. But if the prediction does not change too much, then we tolerate this graph, and we do not consider this as an adversarial attack. So that's why here we use an hyperparameter sigma, which tell us to what extent do we consider a neighbor graph as an adversarial example or not. So for example, if we take sigma equal to 0, then we do not tolerate any variation in the output manifold. So every change in the prediction would be considered as an adversarial attack. And when we consider sigma too high, then we will never find an adversarial example. So it's clear that adversarial risk is a decrease in function of sigma. And we say that a GNN or a graph-based function is gamma robust if this adversarial risk is smaller than gamma. So the overall idea of the paper is to find a theoretical gamma which holds for any GNN or any graph convolutional network. And we will try to minimize this gamma because minimizing it will minimize the adversarial risk of graph neural network. So I will just simply recall that in graph structured data, as I said, we have both structure, node, and edges, and also on the other side, the node features. And many GNN robustness paper, they tackle the problem of structure, but there is a little work on how to defend against attacks at the level of features. So the main contribution of this paper is this theorem where we found a theoretical upper bound of the adversarial risk of a GCN of L layer. And so here's the upper bound is the term gamma, and it's a multiplication of several terms. So there is three type of terms here. So the first one in blue, which is the products of the norm of the weights of the GNN. So here the norm is that's how you define in the message passing scheme these learnable parameters in the update step. And then there is epsilon and sigma, which are hyperparameters which appear in the definition of adversarial risk. And then there is what we called the sum of the normalized walks of length L-1, where L is the number of layer in the GCN. So to give a quick interpretation of this upper bound, so this term here, epsilon, sigma, and the sum of normalized walks of length L-1, they are fixed because epsilon, sigma are defined at adversarial risk, and the sum of the normalized walk is something which is fixed because we have only one graph, so it's fixed. And the only thing that we can optimize or reduce in this upper bound on the model architecture is this norm of the weights. And another intuition that we can get from this upper bound is that when the sum of normalized walk is very small, so when the graph is sparse, it's not too much connected, then the adversarial risk is small as well, so it is less vulnerable to adversarial attack. So, like long story short, like to make our GCN more robust, we just need to make this products of the norm of the weights smaller, which will lead to more robust GCN. So for that, the idea that we got is to use an algorithm that makes those weights orthonormal, so which have a norm of almost 1. And for that, we use an algorithm called Bjork orthonormalization algorithm, which is simply iterative algorithm, and it have some advantage because we can simply we can also control the norm of the weights using other methods like Parseval and regularization. So Sofiane will present later this Parseval experiment and see that we reach better results using Bjork orthonormalization. The benefits of Bjork is that first is back propagation. We can use it in the back propagation, so it's simply products of some weights. And the second one is that it gives a good trade-off between the robustness and the clean accuracy. So we can simply have a very robust GCN by simply taking a constant GCN that give one constant, but we will lose the first task, which is the classification task. So Bjork orthonormalization gives a good trade-off between both of them, because if we use on the other side regularization, we will have a multitask setting, so we will lose on single task performance, so we'll have a very low clean accuracy. So that's it. Yeah, so most robust evaluation use the worst case accuracy of a GNN when exposed to specific type of attack, like Gaussian attack or net attack. Sofiane will present this in next slide. So one other contribution is that we want to estimate this adversarial risk and use this as an evaluation metric to estimate the robustness of GNN. And why do we need to do this, and what is the advantage of using this? So our metric is first attack independence. So imagine in the next 3 years there is a new type of attack. So and then we need to have an evaluation specific to this type of attack. And the other advantage, which is that's our GNN, we did not have any assumption on the type of the GNN we are using. So it's also model agnostic robustness metric based on uniform sampling. So here I will delve into how to estimate this robustness. So if you remember the first definition, it was a probability. We can turn it into an expected value of the indicator function. And to estimate it, we simply use the law of large numbers. And so instead of we need to sample for each graph Jx, we need to sample a neighborhood feature x tilde, which is from the ball surrounding the original feature matrix with a budget of epsilon. So instead of sampling the x tilde, we can first sample this z from this ball. So we will sample a Z matrix with a norm smaller than epsilon, and we can simply take x tilde, which is equal to x plus Z. However, when dealing with the norm of matrix, look, it's very difficult to uniformly sample from this ball centered at 0. So instead, we use a method called stratified sampling. So this ball B epsilon is a disjoint union of many spheres. All the different spheres are disjoints, and their union gives this ball. So what we do is that first we will choose which sphere we will sample from, and to do so we will sample from this prior distribution. So we did the proof on the paper, and once we did that, we directly sample from this sphere. So we also detail everything in the paper. So this is the two-step stratified sampling. So this is just an algorithm to recall to recall how we did that. So imagine we have a graph Jx. We have a number of samples. So in the paper, we also give what is the theoretical minimum number required required number of samples, Lmax. So we iteratively samples a distance r from the prior p epsilon that I defined here. So and then we will sample from the sphere. So we also detail this in the paper. We take the new adversarial inputs, and then we simply check if the distance between the two inference prediction is smaller or larger than a certain sigma that we predefined, and then we just simply do the law of large numbers. So this is how we estimate our adversarial risk, and then I will give the stage to Sofiane to talk more about the other evaluation metrics and the experiments.
Okay, cool. Let's see if you can see my screen. Yeah, I think you can see it now. Okay, so thank you, Yassine. So I will try to delve more into the practical side of how we evaluate everything. Just as a quick recap. Basically, in a node classification setting, we have a certain graph, a big graph, and different nodes, right? Between them, we have the structure, which is what Yassine called the adjacency in the beginning. And so basically, we have the adjacency matrix, but we also have the node features. So each node can here have a certain vector of informative information that we use for the classification. And also the edges, in sometimes we can have a vector that contains some node features, okay? The main idea is that if we take, for instance, this node, if we add this small edge here, would the prediction change from a green to a blue one? Okay, so that's the idea of adversarial attack in the case of graphs. And different from images, we have a more rich structure, which means more attack possibilities. For instance, we can either edit the edge, as we said here. So for instance, we can delete this one or add another one or something like that. Or we can also edit the node, like the node features or the edge features, right? And the last setting, which is usually not very common in the literature, is that we can delete the whole node with all its connection. And we have different settings, such as classical adversarial literature, the white box, in which we consider we have the whole information about the model, the training data, we have access to the architecture, something like that. Or something that we call black box, in which we assume that we don't have any knowledge whatsoever about the model, and we can only ping the model, we can have the classification at each time without having access to the gradient, which is really important. So one should expect that the attack methodologies in the case of white box will be way better than the black box. Okay. So in our work, we only focus on these two main attack settings. As Yassine said, we either attack the structure or we attack the node features. And the theorem that he showed is actually for this one, but in the paper, we also have this a theorem for the structural perturbation, in which similar orthonormalization will yield better robustness. Okay, and of course, to evaluate our method, we have to the only way that is done now in the literature is that we use the state-of-the-art adversarial attacks, and we try to compete with other defense methods and see who is better in terms of accuracy. For this, in the case of node feature attacks, we consider two main attacks. The first one is a random attack. Is we basically sample from a Gaussian, then we just add this vector to our node features. So somehow we are perturbing it with something that is simple. So it's a pretty fast attack since you only have to sample and do an additional operation. The second one is what we call gradient based. Basically, we check the model, we do a prediction, then we have a way to calculate the gradient, such as to understand which part of the graph was the more intuitive in terms of explaining somehow the final prediction, and from that we can know which edge or which node feature to attack. Okay, so we use proximal gradient descent, the classical one, and something called net attack. In terms of structures, mainly the things that work really well are the gradient based, and there's also another method that try to combine gradient with the probabilistic, because somehow the graph is a discrete. So at the end, we can't keep a fully connected graph, but we have to sample somehow the edges to have the same structural effect of a graph. Okay, so we compare our method, which is this one, GCORN, to other available benchmarks for different attacks. So here are the attacks, and for different benchmark datasets. It turns out that ours is way better than all the others in the majority of the cases, especially for node features attacks. Okay, and especially the difference becomes like really big when we push the epsilon, which is the attack budget, bigger. So we have more margin to show that our method actually works pretty well. Same for structural attacks. We fairly do like really good results in comparison to the others in the majority of datasets. Okay, and of course our method can also work when we attack both the structure and the node features at the same time. So there are some methods that can do that, and we have the results in the paper which show that we can also be really performant in this case. Okay, of course, afterwards, intuitively, we will use our own certificate somehow to validate that our GCORN is better than the other methods. Remember that Yassine explained what is it, is that we have a certain expectancy over the input manifold in terms of the output and the distance, and how different is the distance, right? So the fastest we go to the zero, the better we are. So when we have a sigma which is 0 at this value, it means that any small perturbation can be adversarial attack. So it makes sense that everything starts from 1, but the idea is to see how much time it takes, how much should we push the sigma until we converge into a probability of 0, finding whether we have an attack or not. Okay, and we can see that in our case we are the better, and for different data sets, better than all the other benchmarks. And of course, because ours wasn't like our certificate wasn't valid at that time, so we also had to compare to using other certificates that are available in the literature, which are not, of course, only designed for graphs, but were more general, but they are also applicable in terms of graphs. But it turns out that our GCORN is way better than all the others. Okay. But is it all perfect, right? Because when I started to show the results, everything seems perfect. We have the better results than all the others in terms of accuracy. But is it really the case, right? There must be something like not working. And the main problem that we have in our method is that it's an iterative method. So basically we take the weight at each forward pass and we try to project it into the orthonormal manifold, which means that it's computationally really problematic. And in our projection, like a Taylor expansion, we have something called the order, right? The bigger the order, the more precise is the projection, which means that we will have a better results both in terms of the clean accuracy, but also in the attack accuracy. But this also results in a time complexity that goes higher, right? For our results, we only considered the first order, as it seems that we have good results with that, and it was sufficient somehow. But this problem of time complexity is also valid for other datasets, and for other benchmarks, right? It seems that the bigger the datasets, so basically they are bigger in terms of size, how big is the graph, it turns out that all the benchmarks go up in terms of time complexity. So somehow we say that adversarial robustness, to be robust, it comes with a certain price which you have to pay, which is in terms of training time or in inference time. But the question is, can we do better, right? Can we find a method that could be effective in terms of defending, but at the same time would be simple in terms of training time? That's where we have the second work, which was presented at AAAI this year. Is basically we are trying to solve this problem of high complexity and training time. Intuitive enough, we have something called adversarial training, in which we will try to attack the different train data. We will generate the data. We append them to the training, and we do retrain the model, which will result in a model that is somehow more robust, right? But in this case, the training time goes up because you should also take into account generating the adversarial attacks. So what we did, and the intuitive way of doing it, is that we will just add noise in the hidden dimension, right? So usually in a GCN, as Yassine explained, I take a graph, I push it into a message passing, and here I produce a certain embedding of each node, right? Imagine that for this X, I will just add a certain N, with N is like simplest form of Gaussian, right? Which is scaled, right? Which is exactly this value. So at each forward pass, I add a small noise during the training, which intuitively will make the model be more stable because it has the habitude of seeing more noise. And we show theoretically, well, this is our main result from the paper, is that the gamma, the quantity that we are trying to find for different models, is that this gamma depends on the weight norms as the previous work. It depends on the epsilon, which is the neighborhood, but it also depends inversely on beta, right? Remember that beta is the quantity of noise we are adding. So we have a Gaussian, let's say beta E, and basically beta controls the amount of noise that we are adding into the hidden layer. So of course, the bigger the beta, gamma will go down, which means that the model will be robust. So intuitive way of having a more robust model is to add more noise. Intuitively, one would put beta to the infinity, which will yield the best, probably best robust model. But at the same time, remember that if we add too much noise, then we won't learn anything from our real distribution, but we will only actually try to modelize a Gaussian noise, which is not very helpful in our case, because we still want to keep the right amount of clean accuracy. So we should be really careful when choosing the beta, because the trade-off between clean accuracy and artifact accuracy in this case is a bit tricky. So it seems that when we try with different benchmarks, as the one we have used in the previous paper, that we are doing fairly well. We are not doing the best always, as in the first paper, but the idea here wasn't to do the best attack accuracy or clean accuracy, but actually it was to see if we can do similar, but at the same time have a time complexity, which is acceptable in some online settings, which turns out to be the case. Remember that we only sample from a Gaussian. So the only operation that we do during our forward pass is that we sample and we do an addition, right? We don't do any projection. We don't do any attention-based model like this benchmark. So it's a really simple way. But also the hidden dimension is usually really small. It's like we have 32 or 16 or something like that. So it shouldn't be problematic, and it's always constant for whole model. Whether I change the data sets or not, it will only be constant. So that's where our method gets interesting, is that the bigger the data sets, the same somehow training time it is. While for some methods, the bigger the data set, the crazier it gets in terms of training time. Okay. And of course, our method is model agnostic, right? While we have theoretically only show the results for the GCN, the results can be easily extended for like other methods like GNN or any other method. So it's somehow model agnostic. So I can also merge my method with other defense methods, and it could work, right? But I will have the first burden of having a really high training time. Okay, so as to conclude, graph representation learning is actually a really hot topic now. As Yassine said, graph are ubiquitous, so everyone wants to work on them. And there is also still some margin in which we can improve. Okay, and it's GNN in this case is our like a really powerful tool, but there are still problems regarding the adversarial robustness. So how we can solve that? We have presented two works, but both works work fairly well in terms of robustness, but there are still some other stuff that we can do to optimize it and to make it better. So to summarize, if you want the best possible robust accuracy, then maybe you should aim for our first paper, which is GCORN, in which we have like a really margin on other defense methods, but at the same time, it comes with a really high cost in terms of training time. But if you want a setting in which you have the right trade-off between training time and pretty fairly well results, then maybe you should aim for the noisy GNN approach, okay? So both the papers, you can find them either on archive on the conference websites. And we thank you for having us, and we will be happy to explain or to clarify any question that you may have.
Thank you very much, Sofiane and Yassine, for this great presentation about GNNs and the adversarial attacks. We have indeed some couple questions from the audience. I will start with this question from Hakim. He's asking, he's first congratulating you about the great work and also for your paper on being accepted to ICLR. And he is asking for the about the upper bound. So to minimize the upper bound, do you normalize the weight matrices? Why not only use parameter normalization between layers? Is orthonormality necessary to minimize the upper bound?
Okay, Yassine, shall I go? Or you?
Yeah, you can go. Yeah, there is this trade-off between clean accuracy and robustness, but maybe Sofiane will elaborate it.
Okay, so basically from the bound, we have this quantity, right? So either we will focus on the input graph, we'll try to do different tricks in the pre-processing the input graph so as to make this number of forks smaller, either by specifying the graph or something like that. Or we will be interested in the model itself. Any method that can make the weight go smaller should work technically in the from this bound, right? So if the weights basically go down, means that gamma goes down, means that the robustness will go up, right? So you can, of course, use any weight decay method. You can use Parseval constraints. You can adjust any constraints or penalization. But the problem that we can see in deep learning is that once you add regularization, the accuracy goes down. So that's why Parseval didn't succeed, is they don't have the right trade-off between clean accuracy and the attacked accuracy. But it's a really fair question. If you can find a better method than the projection, it will probably be better. But you have to keep in mind that we also want a clean accuracy that is fairly comparable to the real GCN. Because a priori, we don't know if the graph is attacked or not, right? So we can't permit ourselves to have that. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you very much, Sofiane, for clarifying this. We have another question from Hakim. He is asking about dense graphs. He's asking if the approach is still valid for dense graphs and compared to other approaches. For the case, for instance, PubMed in evaluating your approach of structural attacks and having larger mean degree than Cora and CITESO.
Yeah, so for the first question, so our work, our theoretical work with the work for any so like the theorem was for a graph convolution network, but it could be in the paper we have a generalization for any message passing neural network like graph isomorphism network or graph attention network. It will also work for any type of graphs, either dense, sparse. We just have this theorem that gives us an intuition which type of graph is more vulnerable to adversarial attack. So when we have a sparse graph, so the number of normalized walks is small. So this gamma bound is small. So the adversarial robustness, adversarial risk is also small. So it is less sensitive to adversarial attack. So we just get this intuition using this upper bound. But like what we are doing is works for any type of graphs. And in the experiments, we tested different type of graphs like Cora, which is a homophilic graph. Like, and we also tested some very large number of graphs like CS, GBN archive. Yeah, and also PubMed, if I'm not mistaken, as well. And as Sofiane mentioned in the experiment, we also for the node classification task, for the graph classification task, for the structure perturbation and for the feature perturbation, and also for combination of both perturbation. So I think it's a very complete experimental setup that we did. Like because in some papers they usually tackle only one type of task or one type of attacks. And also we have this contribution of evaluation metric. So like it's like if we have a general framework to test and evaluate robustness for a graph neural network. I don't know if it answered your question, or Sophie, do you want to ask something, or it was
I think it does. So now I will be moving to another question. So this question is more about the alpha and beta that you showed us in slide 6. So the question is, how did you choose those two parameters, and also how do you tune the sigma hyperparameter?
Okay, so like here we give a general distance for graph structure data. As I said, we have the graph structure and the features. So when we wanted to tackle node feature attack, so we simply take alpha equal to 0 and beta equal to 1. So in the theorem in the paper, you will see that we have a D01, and we wanted to work on the structure perturbation. We take alpha equal to 1 and beta equal to 0. We have a case where we have both combination of both structure and perturbation. Then we take non-zero parameters alpha and beta. And like the question of sigma, can you go to the definition of adversarial attack, please? It's a very good question, because like sigma is a hyperparameter that tell us to what extent we want to consider a neighbor graph as an adversarial attack or not. Like if we take sigma equal to 0, it is clear that any small variation in the input manifold will imply a small variation, at least a small variation in the output manifold. So sigma is equal to 0. It means that the difference between the two prediction is always bigger than 0. So we will also always consider this as an adversarial attack. But when taking sigma to a large variation will still be considered as will not still be considered as an adversarial attack. So like how to choose this sigma, it depends on how much we want to consider or to tolerate example as adversarial attack. So Sophie, can you go please to the slide where we did the evaluation with the adversarial risk? So here in the two first plots at the left and in the center, what we did is like in the X plots, we have different value of sigma, and in the Y-axis, we have this adversarial risk. And like one thing that is clear, like for every value of sigma, we always have the lower adversarial risk using our model GCORN. And other thing, like as Sofiane and I mentioned before, like this adversarial risk always decrease as a function of sigma. So even like if we don't want to tolerate any adversarial example by taking sigma very small, like here for like at the example of Cora at the left plots, if we take for example sigma equal to 0.1, like we do not want to tolerate adversarial example at all. Then like we clearly said that adversarial risk like exponentially decrease to 0. It does mean that it's like the GNN is very robust to that.
Thank you for clarifying this and how to specify the sigma hyperparameter. And we have another question about the sparsity. So why you didn't use a sparsity promoting loss function as a regularization?
Good question. The first intuition here, it's right because this is like a weight one, right? So weight one usually when it's sparse, usually when we talk about L1, we talk about sparsity. Again, as I said, it works. You can just add something like a penalization with a certain lambda of your WI, right? With the one, the norm one. The problem what happens is that the clean accuracy will go down. You can actually try it experimentally. Once you add the regularization to a GNN, it starts making weird predictions. Then how to choose the gamma, because intuitively, if you want more robust, you should put the penalization weight to be bigger, then the claim accuracy will down, but at the same time, the robustness will go up. So how to find the right trade-off? We didn't want to mess with that, so we just did the projection part, and it turns out that it works. Why does it work? Also, not that when you do orthonormalization, it's the weight 2 that is equal to 1, not the weight 1. But we have a certain equivalence between different norms that we have in the paper. So when you also penalize the norm 2, you also penalize the norm 1 with a certain parameter d, which is the dimension of the vector. But yeah, it's a good question. The problem is how to find the right trade-off. That would be, I think, my answer.
Thank you for your answer, Sophie. And so for the sake of time, we have indeed a lot of questions from the audience. So for the sake of time, we will have just 3 questions. We have another question, which is about attacks. So which attack possibility are the most impactful? Is it more adding edges, adding nodes, which impacts more the robustness of the GNNs?
Yeah, so empirically, it has been shown that attacking actually the structure is more intuitive, is more impactful. Why is that the case? Because the main idea of GNN is to use the structure itself, right? Because otherwise we could have just put in the node features with the MLP and we can do the prediction. So the part about the structure is really important. And here we can see it also empirically. If we take a proximal gradient descent, the Cora, for example, is doing here something like in the attack setting like let's say for a classical GCN, or okay, let's do ours, it's like 71. Then if we go to the same data set using a proximal gradient on the how can I say, on the structure with actually a really less budget here, we have like 55%. In this case, we have something like 10%. Then you can see how different it is. So somehow, usually we have seen that attacking the structure is really more impactful for the GNN, because that's the intuitive way of the GNN and how it works. Basically, it uses structure to do the prediction. If you attack the structure, it will have more impact. And that's why maybe the majority of the methods were focused on the structure rather than the node features, which are still really important actually, because the main intuition here in the, maybe we have forgot to say it, but the main motivation is that it's easier actually to attack the node, right? Because let's say you are working with a social network like Facebook, it's easier for me as a user to change my age or something like that, which are the node features, rather than going and deleting all my friends or something like that, right? So that's why it is really important. Less impactful in terms of accuracy, but still really important.
Yeah, it makes sense. So here another question is asking about the nature of the graph. Is this approach also applicable on the bipartite graphs? And they are also asking about the code. Is your implementation of code, can they access to it? Is it shared or not?
Yeah, so all the codes are available on GitHub. If you go to the paper links, the QR, if you just scan them, either the ICLR one or the AAAI, you find it on GitHub. And you have the whole implementation for all experiments. Regarding the bipartite, that's a really nice question. I think it will work. If you are meaning by bipartite is the case in which we are using, for example, a recommender system, we represent it as 2 blocks of graphs in which we have users and items, for instance, which is a bipartite graph, then yeah, it works. But once you talk about hypergraphs, it doesn't, in which the different edges, but it's extensible. We can extend it to, we didn't take about it because it's not our main area of focus, but for bipartite, it works.
And also maybe there is no very famous benchmarks for bipartite graphs. So we use the very classical datasets like Cora sites here, PubMed, OGBN.
Yeah,
These are the
but
common.
that could be a nice direction of research.
Yeah,
actually.
true.
Thank you for all those answers and clarifications. So now we have our last question is about what about the materials, books, or any resources that you recommend for people wanting to learn more about GNNs.
Yassine, do you want me to start, or you can start with one?
Yeah, maybe this paper first about Graph Convolutional Network. Like I will share it in the chat. Of Max Wheeling. So it was the paper, like just to give some insights about how GNNs work. So previously they were using something called label propagation, something to just do some propagation of the labels. And then like which rely only on the structure of the graph and labels. And then we know that in graph structure data, we have additional information, which are the node features. And here where information, we want to use this information of features. So here where GNN arise. And I think one of the very first paper to tackle GNNs is this paper of Max Wheeling, which talk about graph convolution network, and I don't know how to share it.
So from a theoretical, I would say there are two main directions in GNNs. There is the empirical one and the theoretical one. Okay, for the empirical one, one can intuitively think about trying to do learning all the classical methods, GCN, GIN, graph attention, and different stuff that have been done. So I would probably start from that to try to have a general idea about what are the actual models, right? From a second direction, which are the theoretical stuff, the main idea is to create something like a workflow, which is like the pack learning in statistical learning. How can we measure the powerfulness of a GNN? So we usually compare it to something called the Westphalia-Lehmann test. So there's this direction of saying how powerful are GNN and when are they powerful or not. So trying to understand how they are doing. And then there are two other directions, which are the actual problems in GNN. What Yassine didn't explain in the beginning is that if you put too much layer, as counterintuitive in CNNs, for instance, you want to stack more layers to have more accuracy. In GNNs, if you put more layers, you will have a problem of what we call over smoothness. So all the representation will go to the same vector. So people are trying to understand that theoretically, so as to come up with new methods like rewiring or other different stuff. So I would probably suggest from starting from the classical methods, trying to understand how they are working, what is graph representation learning, then go to the theory of understanding why does it work, then try to investigate what are the problems, and eventually and hopefully have you in the graph adversarial attacks literature. So maybe we'll have more people, so more methods.
As a last step. So thank you very much, Yassine and Sofiane, for sharing all those insights and recommendations about GNNs and having you both really enriched the discussion. And once again, congratulations on your paper being accepted to ICLR and 2 more papers accepted in top conferences. So with that,
just by the way,
please.
if anyone have more questions, please feel to email me, either me or Yassine or LinkedIn, whatever you want, and we'll be happy to explain more. Sorry.
Sure. Okay, yeah, of course. So yeah, please, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact directly Sofiane and Yassine to ask them about their work. And so this ends our Q&A session. And now we can move to the breakout sessions. But first, we will stop the stream in YouTube, and then we can